With another month of PlayStation Plus games comes another batch of PlayStation Classics you can get by either having a PS Premium account, which gives you the games at no extra charge, or you can buy them separately. Last month, we got Sly Cooper on PlayStation 2 emulated on PS4 and PS5, which was one of the most downloaded games on PlayStation in June, if you can believe it. I did a whole video on it if you haven't seen it yet. I was really hoping for Sly 2 this month, given that it's one of my favorite games ever made, but instead the PlayStation mascot platforming game we got this month was Ratchet & Clank Size Matters. Well, guess I have nothing better to do than talk about it. I just find it funny how Ratchet & Clank has well over 10 games in its backlog, but the first one you can play on modern platforms besides 2016 and Rift Apart wasn't even made by Insomniac Games. It's Size Matters from the PlayStation Portable. If you didn't know, I happen to think this game sucks. See my 2021 review for the full breakdown. But for any Ratchet & Clank fan wanting to relive some PSP nostalgia or experience a part of the series they missed out on, this release is for you, and I'll talk about how the emulation is. Right off the bat, it's worth noting that this is the PSP version of Size Matters. The game was originally developed and released for the PSP, but then it received a port to the PlayStation 2 not long after. A lot of fans seem to think this PS2 version is like a butchering of the game, but having played both, I think the differences are pretty minimal. There's a missing cutscene on PS2, but also some slightly improved graphical effects like the water. But to me, it's always been the same game otherwise. However, the PSP version is the original release, thus making it Size Matters in its purest form, so if I had to pick which one of these two I'd rather Sony choose to emulate for their PlayStation Classics line, I'd just go with the original. Since it's not like the console version was substantially better, it's just the same thing. Though, as my videos on these games have gone into before, I'm not sure where the talking point of the console port ruining the game even came from. It's a hoax as far as I'm concerned. So now we can get into the new version. When you get the game, you might notice a large file size. At least, I saw that brought up as a concern in the Sly video last month, but worry not. The large file size is because when you buy the game, you're getting access to it on PS4 and PS5, the file size representing the two versions combined. I'm not sure why it's even different, but the game is only a couple of gigabytes to download per console, so even on slow internet with the default storage space, Size Matters won't take much to download on one console. With that established, let's talk about features that come with this PSP emulator. First, you got save states and rewinds. What a godsend for this game in particular. Size Matters has a lot of really frustrating moments that don't pertain to the core Ratchet gameplay, like the hoverboard racing.
Do I look like a cheater to you?
No. Not at all. You seem A-okay to me.
Alright, here man, let's race.
These hoverboards are really slippery to control. One wrong move can send you into a wall which kills you and sends you back further in the race. It's possible to recover and win, but it will be tough. Using the rewind feature, I was able to correct mistakes in the races, but also the giant Clank section where it was a war of attrition between me and the boss fight at the end. Save states are also useful for parts like on the Day 9 Moon, where the Luna boss fight begins with this 2-minute long chase scene. Just setting a state for when the battle begins would be really helpful. Same goes for the final boss, which I've never really liked because of it being a bullet sponge and killing Ratchet in 2 hits. What fair and balanced game design. You can also rebind the controls however you want them. But it's worth noting that the PSP's L and R buttons are mapped to L1 and R1, but also the right stick as well. In the original game, you'd use L and R to control the camera. Now you can do that, but also use the stick. It's not full 360 rotation, but it might be more comfortable. If you want the controls to feel better in-game though, an important heads up is that you should go to the in-game pause menu, accessible on the right side of the touchpad, and go to the controls setting and change strafing to be with the left stick. That way, when Ratchet has a weapon out, he'll automatically strafe left and right when you move the stick. The emulator comes with some visual options, but they don't really amount to much. The default image is this native upscale of the original game. If you like playing older games at higher resolutions, this will undoubtedly tickle your fancy. The game is blocky and basic looking, but that's because it's a PSP game blown up on a big screen. It was meant for a significantly smaller display. The other options weren't different enough to merit much use, though. For example, the modern display mode just made the image darker. As early as Poketaru, having the image be like this just made it harder to see. To the point where I can't think of a benefit of playing like this. And then you have the arcade filters. I also don't really see a perk to this option either. It makes the screen feel more like looking at a PSP LCD, but when you bust out your actual PSP and a copy of Size Matters like I briefly did for this video, you'll be reminded of the fact that the PSP screen is really small. Playing it on a huge TV with a filter meant to replicate a tiny screen just doesn't really add anything. I could have told you that without using the real PSP, but I just like showing off my real hardware whenever I get the chance. So yeah, these filters feel like options for the sake of having options rather than things that would really make much of a difference. What I would like to see in this emulator in the future is a native resolution, perfect pixel option. One of the features the PSP emulator does have is the ability to reduce the screen size to make it more like the original. I think a perfect pixel option would make for a more cohesive look alongside this. For example, the cutscenes are all pre-rendered, and so no matter what the resolution of the game is, these scenes will all be really pixelated. Making the game run at the original resolution would increase the consistency between the gameplay and the cutscenes. And it also would obscure the more blocky models and basic textures. I don't think the HD upscale route is bad, I just think having a pixelated option would be a meaningful difference that they should totally implement. I said the same thing regarding the PS2 emulator last month, and the same goes for the PSP one. Trophy hunters are in luck though, because the game has a full list of trophies to collect, which will give you more playtime with this game, even besides doing all the minigames, collecting titanium bolts, buying all the weapons, doing New Game Plus, getting all the skill points, and all that other post-game stuff. I'm only into trophy hunting for games I like, but it is there if you want it. No matter what, if you're new to this game and kind of vaguely remember Ratchet & Clank games, expect to run into issues inherent to size matters that no emulator could ever fix. There were numerous moments where the camera was way too zoomed in and it made it really hard to fight and see enemies. Ratchet does a full U-turn whenever you move the stick forward and backward. The weapons, even at the beginning of the game, never do enough damage to feel satisfying against enemies, and as the game goes on, it becomes more frustrating because enemies become more resistant to attacks and start dishing out more damage. With a roster of mostly pea shooters, you can see the writing on the wall. What I mean to say is, I think Ratchet & Clank Size Matters is just a poor game, not for any reason inherent to it being a PSP Ratchet game. In fact, I think the controls are largely intuitive. It's the game design and frustrating levels that kill this one for me. Over the years, I've gotten a lot of pushback against my saying I didn't like this game from many people who played it when it was new, but I also played this game when it was new. I got the PSP bundle of this game as an end-of-school-year present in first grade. I played my fair share of Ratchet & Clank Size Matters on PSP and PS2, but from an adult lens, I don't think it remotely holds up. But then, what is the point of this video? Well, like I said at the beginning, I was hoping to see Sly 2 on PS5 this month, but I don't know, maybe Sony's holding on to that one for the game's 20th anniversary in September. But in the absence of that game not being here, I figured I could also quickly talk about this one and give my thoughts on the PSP emulator. I think the emulator's pretty good. There's visual features I wish it had, however, I think this is a great way to play PSP games, and I'd love to see more classics from that roster like Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops or Mega Man Maverick Hunter X come to PS5. So, the emulator is high quality, making this the best way to play Size Matters. It would have been by default since it's the game's first official release in over a decade, but it's also nice that the emulation job is good, right? But, should you buy it? Well, if you like the idea of your old favorites coming back, then I'd say you should. Sly Cooper was a big hit last month, and executives notice these things. So if you want to see more of your old favorite franchises, it's worth buying for that alone. Same for Daxter, which came out on PlayStation Classics last month as well. I added that to my library, and I also added Jack the Lost Frontier to my library when it came out a few months back, and I think that game sucks. If you like great games, I don't know if I'd recommend it then, but if you're a die-hard Ratchet fan, you might as well give it a whirl if you haven't played it or haven't played it in a long time. I may not think it's even remotely good, but it's always worth trying games for yourself to see what you think. Just don't expect a premium Classic Ratchet experience from this one. But speaking of premium Classic Ratchet action, it is fascinating to see that this game is on current platforms before the PS2 Ratchet quadrilogy. I'm sure we'll see those games at some point, but I don't know when. The PS2 Ratchet games are apparently difficult to emulate, so it would probably take some work, but I'm sure it will happen at some point. I also hear in the rumor mill that Sony's working on a PS3 emulator too. If that ends up good, we may see those 4 games via their PS3 editions. That would probably upset fans since they're definitely better on PS2, but still, either one may happen. And with a PS3 emulator, that could mean Ratchet's PS3 backlog could be rescued from being lost on that platform, which would be pretty cool to see as well. But speaking in the short term, I thought it was funny to see this game back, as playing it again was not on my 2024 bingo card, but here's hoping Sly 2 is around the corner. That's what I really want to see. But given the fact that Daxter, The Lost Frontier, and Size Matters are all in the PlayStation Classic catalog, it seems likely that Secret Agent Clank isn't far away, but I can tell you right now, if that happens, I am not fucking playing it. I'm not even adding it to my library like The Lost Frontier. No thank you, that game is awful. But this video's gone on long enough. I hope everyone enjoyed the quick update. And I hope everyone's looking forward to next week's huge Sonic project. But until then, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.